Hey friends, quick thing before we start. For those of you who don't know, I've spent the past few years writing this book, and the good news is that it's finally released. It's called Lessons from a Terrible Photographer, and I want to try out a pitch on you guys. You're the first ones to hear it. I've been working on it for a few weeks, and here's my pitch. Influencers talk about cameras. This book, however, is about the things that cameras can't fix. You like that? Because the war is internal, and it's not technical. I'm so proud of that. The war is internal and not technical. Now, because I absolutely have no self-control when it comes to packaging, I'm a big design nerd. The launch is actually limited to a collector's box. It includes the book, which is signed and numbered. It has a signed print from me, a field notes notebook, and a hand-typed letter from me on my 1920s Corona typewriter. It's pretty cool. And there's actually much more swag in there too. It's a literal artifact. It's also $69.99. And I know that feels weird to say out loud, but printing costs apparently are absolutely insane. And I wanted this to be really special. So there are only 35 of these in existence, probably a lot less now. So if you want one, the link is in the show notes. And if that price sounds a little crazy to you, I get it. I totally get it. The standard hardback comes out in January, available for pre-order. Okay, on with today's episode. So a couple weeks back, I was in a conversation with a small group of photographers online. And at some point, the conversation turned to lighting. One of the photographers, this older guy, very established, very successful, you probably have seen his work, started talking about Profoto and how it's the only lighting system worth using, how nothing else is acceptable on a professional commercial set. He said, Profoto may be bronze collar if you're in Europe, but that's about it. Anything else and you're not serious. Someone asked about Godox. Good lights, you know, they're reliable and they're a fraction of the price. And this guy, he just dismissed it. He laughed it off. Godox? Come on, you're not putting that on a real production set. You know, people expect to see Profoto, and that's what rental houses carry, and that's what real professionals use. Now, I stayed quiet for a minute because I wanted to make sure I just wasn't being defensive. I wanted to think about my response. Because here's the thing. I own Godox. I trust Godox. I've shot entire productions with Godox, and the work came out beautiful. And I guarantee you, if you were to look at my portfolio, where I have shot both Profoto and Elechrome and Godox, you probably can't tell the difference between those three. When it comes to the quality of light, the actual physics of how these strobes work, the differences between Godox and Profoto and other brands are really scientifically negligible. We're talking about tiny color variations that really don't show up in the final image unless you're doing really rigorous color measurement. And so I spoke up diplomatically, of course, and I said something along those lines. I've said that I've shot with Godox on professional sets. I said that the lighting quality is functionally identical. I said that I'll rent Profoto when I need to because that's what, you know, big rental houses carry. And yeah, some clients expect to see it. Some gaffer crews, some lighting crews, that's what they know how to use. But at the end of the day, these lights basically do the same thing. So to give some context, when I left my corporate photography job, I had a little bit of savings to purchase my own gear for jobs. I had to purchase an extra camera, an extra R5. I had to purchase a bunch of grip, like C-stands, stuff that I've never had to own. And I had about $3,000 for lights. I didn't have the money for Profoto, even though I was using Profoto before. I know Profoto is good, but I didn't have Profoto money. And so I purchased Godox as really just a temporary fix to get me through for a while until I could justify paying for Profoto heads. And I was able to purchase 3 Godox heads for the price of 1 Profoto head. And you want to hear the crazy thing? I still use the Godox 3 years later. I like them. They work. And I've never had any issues with them. And I've never been able to financially justify upgrading to Profoto at this point. So when I gave a rational, diplomatic argument for their use, do you know what happened in this conversation? Nothing, really. There wasn't really a response. There was no articulated rebuttal, just silence, just a passive aggressive silent dismissal where he probably knew I had a point. He probably knew that I was right even, but couldn't admit it as such. And it was in that silence, there was something else, I think, going on. There was some subtext, an unspoken message. And it's this: you're not a real commercial photographer unless you shoot Profoto. You don't belong at this table. Well, my name is Patrick Fuller, and this is the Table Photographer Podcast, where we have honest conversations about creativity, identity, and discovering your voice. This is part 3 of a 4-part series I'm calling The Long Middle, and today is episode 43. Now, the long middle is that specific season in a creative life where you've mastered the skills, you've built the business, you've done pretty much everything quote unquote right, but something still feels off. You're good at what you do, but you feel invisible. You're successful, but you're a little lonely. In part 1, we talked about the island, the loneliness that comes when you get so good at something that fewer and fewer people can actually see what you're doing or understand what you've built. Your Joshua Bell. Remember Joshua Bell in the subway where he's playing the Stradivarius and everyone is just walking past. In part 2, we talked about the costume and how we hide behind professional roles and personas instead of showing up as ourselves, and how we can't find community because we're all dressed as stagehands, terrified of being seen without our armor. And today, in part 3, we're talking about the enemy. We're going to talk about 3 things. We're going to talk about hierarchy and gatekeeping and complicity. And if this is your first episode, welcome. You can jump in anywhere. These episodes are in no particular order outside of this series. And as always, you can email me at any time with questions, thoughts, rage. I respond to everything in a timely manner, or at least I try to. My email is in the show notes. Okay, so let's get into it. Okay, so let's back up a little bit. Let's slow this thing down and name what's actually happening. Because on the surface, this interaction, this sort of conversation feels a little small. You know, the conversation between us photographers. It's a debate about lighting gear. Who cares? You know, it's Profoto versus Godox, a conversation that has probably happened a million times amongst photographers. You know, you're talking about specs or reliability or brand performance or whatever else. And it's totally reasonable. It's totally professional, except in this conversation, and in a lot of conversations, it's actually not about the lights. It's actually about gatekeeping. So gatekeeping, that word gets thrown around a lot online, usually badly. So let's actually define it properly, shall we? The term actually comes from social science. Back in the 1940s, a psychologist named Kurt Lewin was studying how decisions move through systems. And his realization was pretty simple, that things don't flow freely. They move through gates, and someone decides what gets through. That person is called, drum roll, please, the gatekeeper. Gatekeeping isn't necessarily about standards. It's about control of access. Who gets in, who gets heard, and who gets taken seriously. And most importantly, who doesn't. And once you start seeing gatekeeping, you begin to see it everywhere. Let's talk about kitchens for a minute, shall we? Not your kitchen, not my kitchen, but kitchens in professional restaurants, specifically old school classical kitchens, especially in France. These kitchens ran on lineage. You didn't become a real chef because your food tastes delicious. You became a real chef because you trained under the right chef in the right kitchen in the right city. Paris mattered. The name on your resume mattered. You could execute a dish perfectly. You could outcook the entire room full of chefs. But if you didn't come up through the right lineage, you were always going to be almost talented, but not serious, skilled, but not legitimate. This wasn't about standards. This was about inheritance. Then something inconvenient happened. People started cooking incredible food outside of the gates. You had immigrant kitchens. You had hole-in-the-wall restaurants. You had food trucks, places with plastic chairs and menus taped to the wall. And there wasn't pedigree here. There's no blessing, just results. And suddenly the definition of real chef became a little obsolete and had to change. Not because the standards necessarily had dropped, but because reality embarrassed the gatekeepers. The gates didn't open out of generosity. They opened because they couldn't contain the actual work anymore.
In many ways, the work of a critic is easy. We risk very little, yet enjoy a position over those who offer up their work and themselves to our judgment. We thrive on negative criticism, which is fun to write and to read. But the bitter truth we critics must face is that in the grand scheme of things, the average piece of junk is probably more meaningful than our criticism designating it so. But there are times when a critic truly risks something, and that is in the discovery and defense of the new. The world is often unkind to new talent, new creations. The new needs friends. Last night I experienced something new, an extraordinary meal from a singularly unexpected source. To say that both the meal and its maker have challenged my preconceptions about fine cooking is a gross understatement. They have rocked me to my core. In the past, I have made no secret of my disdain for Chef Gusteau's famous motto, "Anyone can cook." But I realize only now do I truly understand what he meant. Not everyone can become a great artist, but a great artist can come from anywhere. It is difficult to imagine more humble origins than those of the genius now cooking at Gusteau's, who is, in this critic's opinion, nothing less than the finest chef in France. I will be returning to Gusteau soon, hungry for more.
Okay, so this is the part that matters. Gatekeeping survives until outcome makes the gate look ridiculous, until the work speaks louder than the lineage, until the results show up without permission. And photography, I think, this is my observation, is right in the middle of this shift. This shift has been happening for a while now. People are building careers without the old cities, without the old mentors, without the gear lists, not because they're cutting corners or they're producing less quality work, but because they're solving real problems for real clients in real time. And that scares the shit out of people who came up and who are protected by the gates. So the question isn't whether gatekeeping exists. It absolutely does. It's this. When the gates start falling, do you stand there trying to reinforce them? Or do you step aside and help people through? Because one is leadership and the other is being a coward, terrified of losing your relevance. So now I want to take that idea in that context and put it back in that conversation that I had with those photographers. Profoto strobes cost about $3,000 to $4,000 to up to $10,000 if you get one of those really fancy pack and head systems. Godox strobes cost between $500 and $2,000 depending upon how much power it has. And I'm going to be really fucking honest here. I know there will be people to make the case for Profoto. They're going to make even a very intelligent scientific case, but I don't really give a shit. They aren't the ones who pay my California housing costs. The light hits the subject the same way. The camera records it the same way. The client can't tell the difference. But one of these brands signals that you're legitimate, not because of the image, but because of buy-in. That's not quality standard. That's actually access standard. And once you see it there, you can't unsee it. It shows up in pedigree. If you don't assist for the right photographers in the 90s, if you didn't come up in New York or Los Angeles, if you didn't inherit a network, a referral tree, a reputation you didn't personally build, you're subtly made to feel like you're behind, like you missed the real starting line. Like you should be grateful just to be in the room, so you be quiet and you're careful. You don't ask for too much. And here's where I need to be really honest about where I'm standing. I didn't come up through a traditional photography system. I didn't come up through LA or New York and mentor under the right people. I actually grew up in the Midwest. I started as a graphic designer. I learned photography inside of advertising agencies as a junior designer, then graphic designer, then senior graphic designer. And I was able to steal the cameras whenever I could, shooting whatever was in front of me, either print pieces for case studies, anything that let me practice. Then I shot weddings. I began to experiment with family photography, and I would take the camera out on weekend and shoot landscapes in Bellingham, Washington, and street photography in Vancouver, a little bit of everything. Not because I had some master plan, but because I just love this shit and I was trying to learn as much as I could. And eventually I talked my way into becoming the lead photographer for a global guitar brand. And that was a shift for me. This is where photography stopped being a side interest or a passion or something that I'm learning into being the actual work as a part of my full-time job. I wasn't trained by the system or a mentee or an established commercial photographer. I stitched my way in from the edges, you know? So no, I didn't have the right city. I didn't have the right mentors. I didn't have the right gear budgets. And when I started freelancing 3 years ago, I took the jobs that other people passed on. I learned by doing, not by being approved. And for a while, that kind of fucks with your head. You start sanding down the truth about who you are, or you tell the truth and feel like you don't belong. And neither one makes you a better photographer. there are plenty of rooms where I felt that difference. Rooms of commercial photographers who had assisted the right people, who had seemingly never-ending lists of stories where they could name drop. They shot the right celebrities. They used the real lights, had the right shorthand. And in those spaces, I felt less than. Not because the work wasn't good, but because my path didn't look like theirs. And here's the part that matters, and I want you to listen closely here. This is not about bitterness. I'm not angry about this. I'm not sad about this. And it's definitely not about lowering standards. Look, this is what I've learned in the past 3 years of doing this. Legitimacy as a professional photographer has been confused with proximity to power. And once you start to see that clearly, you get to decide something really important personally. You can either become another gatekeeper, or you can choose to be something else entirely. But what I want to do now is I want to zoom out a little bit. Let's take a step back and see this through the eyes of those of us who aren't commercial photographers, because this isn't just a commercial photography problem. The pattern, this gatekeeping pattern, exists everywhere, right? Wedding photography. If you're not charging $40,000, you're not, quote, there yet, right? If you shoot exclusively digital and not film, you're not a real wedding photographer. If you're not featured in Style Me Pretty or Vogue Weddings, you're not established, right? If you're shooting Saturday weddings at the local country club in Ohio instead of a 3-day destination event in Italy, you're still building your cute portfolio. And here's the one that kills me. How many photographers have introduced themselves by saying, I'm just a wedding photographer? Like they have to apologize, like shooting one of the most important days in someone's life somehow doesn't count, you know? Portrait photography. Let's talk about portrait photography for a second. If you shoot corporate headshots for a living, you're doing quote unquote boring work, soulless, no creativity. If you shoot family portraits, you're a soccer mom who just does photography for fun, makes a little extra money now and again. You're not a real artist. If you shoot high school seniors, that's just yearbook stuff. If you shoot boudoir work, well, people get weird about that one real fast. But if you call yourself a portrait artist instead of a portrait photographer, if your work hangs in galleries, if you shoot for editorial magazines, now you're legitimate. Fashion photography. Talk about gatekeeping. Fashion photography, I feel like, is the OG of gatekeeping. If you shoot for Vogue, right, Harper's Bazaar, top tier, you've made it. Local boutiques, lookbooks for small brands, not real fashion. Catalog work, e-commerce, definitely. That's actually product photography with a model. And if you think it's just photography, you're wrong, right? Every creative field, maybe every field, has its own version of only Profoto on professional sets. Writers, bylines in the New Yorker, the Atlantic, legitimate. Self-published or Substack, not a real writer. Musicians, major record deal, legitimate. Indie release, bedroom producer, still trying to make it, right? Filmmakers, Sundance, legitimate. YouTube, just making content. Designers, big agency, legitimate. Freelance, Fiverr, doing logos on the side. The pattern is everywhere. And it's designed really to keep people out. And here's the part that I don't want to say out loud. I've tried to keep people out because if I'm going to call out gatekeeping and the enemy, I have to call out my own sort of fallen nature here. I have to. You know, I have been the gatekeeper. I have looked down on certain genres. I've made jokes about headshot photographers, how they're basically DMV photographers, right? Just stick them in front of a gray backdrop. I've dismissed baby photographers, newborn photographers. How hard can it be? The subject can't even move. When in doubt, just put a bigger bow on their head. When someone tells me that they're a branding photographer or a high school sports photographer, I've had the quiet, arrogant thought, they're not as good as me. What I do is harder. What I do matters more. What I do is more expensive. Like, I'm fucking special. I've walked by family photographers on the beach countless times setting up their lights, and I've looked at their camera, I've looked at their setup and smiled at the joke that I made in my head or said under my breath. I've been a dick. Photographers can be dicks. See episode 2. I'm guilty of doing the exact same fucking thing to other photographers as those commercial photographers did to me. I enforced the hierarchy, not because I believed in it, but because it felt good not to be at the bottom. Because if I looked down at someone else, then maybe I wasn't the only one being looked down on. And that's the trap, you know? The hierarchy doesn't survive because the people at the top enforce it. It survives because the people in the middle enforce it. Because we're so afraid of being dismissed, we dismiss everyone else first. Now, I want to tell you about a moment that I had on this app called Clubhouse. During COVID, for some reason, photographers gathered in this really weird audio digital space, this audio only, no video, just voices in this audio chat room. It's kind of weird, kind of embarrassing to talk about, but so much of my experience with the other photographers have came from this weird little app. And so I would join these rooms full of these established commercial photographers, these people who have been in the industry for decades. For some reason, they joined this app and they would hang out and talk to each other. Most of them were from Los Angeles. Mostly in these spaces, I would just listen, you know, but sometimes I would actually speak up. I would contribute to the conversation. I would share an experience or offer an idea. And when I did, 9 times out of 10, this is what would happen. They would pause for a moment, right? And then they would just sort of keep talking. Like I hadn't said anything, like I wasn't even there. Or worse, they would barely acknowledge what I said, give it a half-second consideration, then quickly move on. But when someone else spoke, someone with the quote, right credentials, someone that they knew, someone who had assisted for the right photographer or who had shot the right cover for the right magazine, they would stop, they would engage, and they would build upon the idea. And I just would sit there listening to them shit talk other photographers, dismissing someone's work, laughing about someone who didn't get it, mocking someone who used the wrong gear or shot for the wrong clients. And the whole time I was thinking, man, what do they say about me when I'm not there? At the time, I was working for Taylor Guitars full time. I was shooting globally recognized artists. I've shot Phineas, Zach Brown, major campaigns, work that mattered, work that I was seriously proud of. But when I would talk to these established commercial photographers, people who had made it in the traditional sense, I could feel it. I could feel the subtle dismissal. Like I had accidentally sat down at the cool kids table at lunch. They would look at me for a second, not hostile, just confused, like who the fuck let you in here? And then they would just keep talking about their shoots and their clients and tell their stories about their amazing name-droppy world. And I wasn't a part of it. And here's the thing that I'm kind of ashamed to admit, I internalized it a lot. I censored what I said. I started hiding my work. The work that I'm proud of was a lot of product work. It's technical, it's challenging, it's good work. In fact, I would argue to say my work was more technical and more advanced than some of theirs. They didn't know some of the shit that I knew how to do technically, right? They didn't know Capture One because they always hired digital techs. I busted my ass learning everything I could about this craft, but because I didn't have the right pedigree or assist the right person or shoot the right cover for the right magazine, I wasn't seen as legitimate. So when people asked me what I was working on or what I shot, I started hiding, or I would sort of censor what I'm talking about. But again, I'm proud of it. It's product work. It's technical. It's challenging. It's good work. But it's not a portrait of an A-list celebrity for a magazine cover. It's not a campaign for a luxury brand. It's not editorial fashion for Vogue. Sometimes it's e-commerce photography. It's product shots. It's headshots of lawyers in pantsuits. And I learned not to talk about it. I didn't want to be judged for doing that kind of work, even though that kind of work was keeping food on my table and a roof over my head. And when someone asked what you were working on, I would dodge those questions. I would mention a potential job that was more in line with what I thought should be doing. I would talk about the future instead of the present. I would only mention the jobs that I thought might impress them, but not the ones that were actually paying my bills. I tried so hard to keep up appearances because I was afraid that if I told the truth, if I said, well, this week I'm shooting a racquetball racket for an e-commerce site, they would dismiss me. They would see me as, quote, not there yet. And here's what that feels like in that moment. Here's what it felt like. It wasn't anger. It wasn't frustration. It was grief. It's a weight on your soul. It's shame. It's feeling small in that moment, feeling like you're not enough, feeling like you're just pretending to be something that you're not. And I fucking hated it, but I did it anyway because it's a small world and people talk and I didn't want to make waves. So here's what I've realized. The enemy isn't the older photographer in my conversation with the other photographers who said, quote, only Profoto. The enemy isn't photographers in that Clubhouse app who dismissed me. The enemy isn't even the industry gatekeepers who decided what's, quote unquote, acceptable and what's not. The enemy is the hierarchy itself. The worst part, I'm complicit. I enforce the same hierarchy that hurts me. I hide a lot of my work because I've decided somewhere along the line that this is, quote, less than. I've dodged questions about headshots because I've internalized the idea that headshots don't count, that they're beneath me or they should be beneath me. I rent Profoto gear, even though I don't really need it. Not because the light is better, but because I'm performing legitimacy for people who might judge me if I don't. I've become part of the system. And this hurts us all. It keeps us divided. It keeps us competitive and insecure. It makes us see other creatives as threats instead of allies. It makes us hide good work because it's not the right kind of work. It makes us lie about what we're actually doing because we're afraid of being judged. It keeps us lonely because we can't connect with each other when we're all performing, when we're all pretending, when we're all hiding behind the costume of success. Last week, I talked about how we hide behind professional roles, how we can't find community because we're dressed as stagehands, invisible, terrified of being seen. This week, I'm saying something a little harder. Even though we take off the costume, even though we try to be vulnerable, even when we take off the costume, even when we try to be vulnerable, even when we show up as ourselves, we're still enforcing a hierarchy that tells us that we're not enough. We're competing for the wrong thing. We're competing for status, for credentials, for the stamp of approval from people who have decided that they get to be gatekeepers. But here's the truth. The gatekeepers don't fucking matter. The hierarchy is arbitrary. And the only measure of good work is this. I want you to listen closely. Get out your pencil and write this down. You ready? Did you solve the problem? Did you do it well? That's it. Did you solve the problem? Did you do it well? There is no quote acceptable work less than work. There's just fucking work. Wedding photography isn't less legitimate than the editorial fashion. Product photography isn't less legitimate than the celebrity portrait. Headshots aren't less legitimate than the gallery prints. A $2,000 local wedding isn't less valuable than a $40,000 destination wedding. Godox isn't less professional than Profoto. A self-published book isn't less legitimate than a New Yorker byline. The hierarchy exists to serve the people who are already inside. It protects their access, their status, their relevancy. It protects their right to decide who gets in and who doesn't. And every time we enforce it, every time we hide our wrong work, every time we perform having the right clients, every time we rent the right gear to look legitimate, we're protecting that system. We're actually keeping ourselves out. So how do we fix this? We reject the hierarchy entirely. We stop playing the game. We stop hiding the work that we're actually doing. We stop dodging the questions about what we're actually working on. We stop performing what we think we should be doing. So here's the challenge for the week. The next time someone asks you, what are you working on? Tell them the truth. Not the impressive version, not the future version, not the version that makes you sound more successful than you actually are, but just tell the actual truth. Well, this week I'm shooting headshots for the law firm, or I'm doing product photography for an e-commerce racquetball brand, or I'm shooting a baby portrait session for $600, or I'm shooting a $2,000 wedding this weekend, and I'm really excited about it. I'm using Godox, and the work looks amazing. But say it with your chest, Say it like it's legitimate fucking work, because it is. It absolutely is. And if someone dismisses you, if they give you that look, right? If they subtly, passively aggressively ignore you, if they make you feel small, less than, that tells you everything you need to know about them. They're still playing the game. They're enforcing the hierarchy. And you don't need their approval. So if we're done tearing down the ladder, the obvious question is, what do we build instead, right? Where do we go from here? Leadership in photography doesn't look like being the most published. It doesn't look like having the most followers. It doesn't look like pretending the early years didn't happen. Real leadership looks quieter than that, I think. It looks like remembering exactly how confusing the beginning was, how every job felt like an audition, how every portfolio felt unfinished, how every invoice felt like a moral dilemma, and choosing not to weaponize that confusion against the next person. Leadership looks like extending a hand instead of pulling it up behind you. It looks like saying, yeah, this part is hard. You're not failing. You're just new. It looks like celebrating someone who shot their first wedding, not interrogating their pricing. It looks like encouraging experimentation, not mocking the attempt because it didn't come out clean. It looks like asking a younger photographer what they're actually trying to say, not what camera or lens they used. It looks like remembering that confidence comes through repetition, not permission. It looks like giving context instead of judgment. You're early instead of you're not ready. You're learning instead of you're doing it wrong. That's brave instead of that won't work. Because here's the thing that no one will say out loud. Every photographer you admire was once awkward, inconsistent, guessing, and terrible. They just had the luck, right? Or stubbornness, or the grace of someone not shutting the door on them too early. A healthier industry doesn't come from the higher standards. It comes from experienced photographers telling the truth. How long it took, how messy it was, how many bad shoots paid for the good ones. And it's not to brag, not to discourage, to normalize that struggle, Because when beginners stop feeling ashamed of being beginners, they take better risks. And when people take better risks, the work gets better. Not more prestigious, but better. So, in closing, here's the invitation for all of us. Be the person you needed when you were first starting out. Not softer, not easier, just more human. Celebrate the effort, protect curiosity, reward honesty. Stop pretending that the struggle disqualifies someone from belonging. It doesn't. It actually qualifies them. So, until next week, as always, stay curious, stay courageous, and stay terrible.